October 29th, 1929, the day history calls Black Tuesday. Wall Street, the proud symbol of American prosperity and boundless faith in the future, suddenly collapsed into chaos. In just one single trading session, 16 million shares were dumped at free-falling prices, and the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange erupted with panic and desperate shouts. Investors who had become millionaires during the roaring stock market boom of the 1920s were wiped out overnight. Banks failed, companies went under, and a financial shockwave rippled across the globe like an unstoppable storm surge. But the most terrifying part wasn't the sheer number of dollars that vanished in a matter of hours. The true fear came from realizing that an entire financial system, once thought unshakable, could shatter so completely, dragging down millions of dreams of wealth and the very idea of the American dream itself. We're often told the 1929 crash happened simply because of wild stock speculation. But the truth runs much deeper. Behind the market's collapse lay a web of flawed policies, years of overinflated confidence, and a world unprepared for the raw, unpredictable force of modern capitalism. Have you ever wondered, how could an economy as powerful as the United States, fresh from its victory in World War I, collapse so suddenly? Who quietly walked away unscathed, or even profited, while millions of ordinary Americans lost everything? And why, nearly a century later, are the same dangerous patterns that fueled the 1929 disaster still echoing through today's global economy? This isn't just a story about the stock market. It's a story about greed disguised as progress, blind faith in endless growth, and a world stepping into the age of industrial finance without the guardrails to keep it safe. In this video, we'll trace every step of the catastrophe, from the glittering Roaring Twenties, when optimism ran wild, consumer spending soared, and stocks climbed without restraint, through the hidden cracks, cheap credit, fragile banks, loose monetary policy, and an enormous speculation bubble quietly swelling beneath the surface, to that fateful Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929, when everything unraveled in a single gut-wrenching day. And finally, to the devastating chain reaction that plunged the entire world into the Great Depression of 1929 to 1933, a dark economic winter that left millions unemployed and reshaped global politics. And here's the chilling part. Nearly 100 years later, many of the same forces that brought down Wall Street then, easy credit, reckless speculation, and fragile trust in banks and governments, still exist in today's interconnected financial system. Join us as we uncover the hidden story behind one of the darkest economic events of the 20th century. Not just to understand the past, but to see the warning signs of the next great financial storm forming right now. To understand why the 1929 Wall Street crash was so devastating that it dragged the entire world into the Great Depression, we have to go back to a very specific moment in time. America after World War I, an era that looked dazzling on the surface but hid deadly illusions underneath. When the war ended, Europe lay in ruins, while the United States emerged as the undisputed economic and financial winner. From 1914 to 1918, America had largely stayed out of the direct destruction of the war, but became the arsenal and banker for the Allied powers. U.S. factories roared at full capacity, churning out steel, coal, ships, munitions, and food on an unprecedented scale. By the time peace arrived, New York had overtaken London as the world's financial capital, and the U.S. dollar began to replace the British pound in global trade. Americans stepped into the 1920s with unshakable confidence, convinced that the future would be nothing but endless prosperity and growth. This was the birth of the Roaring Twenties. Mass production transformed daily life in ways no one had seen before. Ford's Model T put cars on every street. Radios became the centerpiece of family living rooms. Electrification spread to homes across the country. Refrigerators, washing machines, and a flood of new consumer goods redefined modern comfort. Credit revolutionized shopping habits. For the first time, average families could buy now, pay later. Easy installment plans fueled an unprecedented consumption boom and made it seem as though the good times could never end. Meanwhile, Wall Street entered its golden age. The stock market became a symbol of wealth and a seemingly unstoppable money-making machine. Millions of Americans, from the wealthy elite to office clerks and factory workers, plunged into investing. Margin trading became the craze. Investors needed to put down only 10% of a stock's price and borrow the rest. As prices soared, profits exploded, feeding a nationwide get-rich-quick mentality. The Dow Jones Industrial Average doubled in just a few years. Newspapers and radio shows fanned the frenzy, promising that the stock market was the surest path to wealth. The belief that prices would never fall spread like a collective fever. But behind the glittering facade of prosperity was a fragile, deeply flawed economy. American agriculture was collapsing after the war as global demand dropped and crop prices plunged, leaving farmers drowning in debt. The banking system was dangerously fragmented. Tens of thousands of small, poorly capitalized banks operated without deposit insurance and with weak risk management. Income inequality widened sharply. Wealth concentrated in the hands of a small elite, while most households relied on borrowing to maintain their new consumer lifestyle. The economy looked like a grand ship loaded with goods, but built on a paper-thin hull, impressive from afar, but one serious storm could sink it. Even more troubling, the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve were lulled into complacency by the illusion of permanent prosperity. The Fed, still young and inexperienced, failed to manage the credit cycle effectively. Instead of curbing risky lending, it kept interest rates low, unintentionally feeding the stock market bubble. Presidents Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover followed a strict laissez-faire philosophy, minimal government interference and faith that markets would correct themselves. This hands-off approach allowed a massive financial bubble to grow unchecked, day after day. By early 1929, Wall Street had reached dizzying new heights. Headlines proclaimed the dawn of a permanent era of prosperity. But beneath the surface, cracks were spreading. Margin debt had exploded to $8.5 billion. Corporations were sitting on unsold goods. Industrial production was slowing, and the real estate market was cooling. The system looked unshakable. Yet it was quietly overloaded with risk, waiting for just one shock to send it crashing down. By the late 1920s, America looked unstoppable, but in truth, the economy was sitting on a glass foundation. Behind the glitter of the Roaring Twenties was a system stretched to the breaking point, ready to shatter at the first major shock. The stock market frenzy had turned into a nationwide speculative mania, where greed drowned out caution. Millions of Americans believed stock prices could only rise. The boom was supercharged by margin trading. Investors needed only a 10% down payment and could borrow the rest. That leverage worked like rocket fuel when prices climbed, but became a financial noose the moment prices fell. By mid-1929, margin debt had soared past $8.5 billion, nearly 10% of the nation's GDP at the time, a colossal ticking time bomb. Meanwhile, the U.S. banking system was dangerously fragile. More than 25,000 small, thinly capitalized banks operated without deposit insurance or proper risk controls. Many funneled loans directly into stock speculation, tying their survival to an overheated market. If stocks crashed, these banks would crumble, and with no safety net for depositors, panicked bank runs could, and would, spiral out of control. Monetary policy only added fuel and then pulled the rug out. Throughout most of the 1920s, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates low, flooding the economy with cheap credit and quietly inflating the stock bubble. But in 1928 and 1929, worried about excessive speculation, the Fed abruptly raised rates to cool things down. Instead of a soft landing, this credit squeeze choked highly leveraged investors. Forced selling to cover margin calls triggered an accelerating downward spiral. At the same time, the real economy was already flashing danger signs. Industrial production slowed. Unsold inventories piled up. Car sales and housing cooled. Yet newspapers and market pundits kept preaching the gospel of permanent prosperity, blinding the public to the risks beneath the surface. Then the storm hit. October 24, 1929, Black Thursday. Stocks suddenly plunged. Trading volumes smashed records. The New York Stock Exchange floor turned into chaos. Big banks and financiers rushed in, buying shares to stabilize prices, but their efforts were only a temporary bandage. Just 5 days later, on October 29th, Black Tuesday, the dam broke. 16 million shares changed hands in a single day as panic selling engulfed Wall Street. Prices collapsed. Billions in paper wealth evaporated. Millionaires were ruined overnight. The once euphoric trading floor became a scene of exhaustion, shouting, and despair. Outside the exchange, crowds gathered in stunned silence to witness the downfall of an entire financial era. But the crash wasn't the end. It was only the trigger. A devastating domino effect followed. Banks that had poured money into speculative loans failed as their collateral evaporated. Terrified depositors rushed to withdraw savings, creating waves of bank runs that no one could stop. Between 1930 and 1933, nearly 9,000 banks collapsed, wiping out the life savings of millions. Credit dried up. Businesses couldn't finance operations and shut down en masse. Unemployment exploded, hitting 25% by 1933, 1 in 4 Americans out of work. Farmers lost land to foreclosure, cities filled with sprawling shanty towns known bitterly as Hoovervilles. And while ordinary Americans suffered, the Hoover administration clung to a hands-off, laissez-faire philosophy, insisting the market would heal itself. This refusal to intervene turned a sharp recession into the Great Depression. One of the most damaging moves was the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. Designed to protect American industry, but instead strangling global trade and spreading the crisis overseas. Confidence, the lifeblood of any financial system, completely collapsed. People lost faith not only in banks and markets, but in the government's ability to help. The Great Depression was not just an economic disaster, it was a total breakdown of trust, something no nation can recover from quickly. And here's the haunting truth. The root mistakes that created this catastrophe, cheap credit, reckless leverage, blind faith in self-correcting markets, and slow, misguided policy responses, have resurfaced time and time again in the decades since. Nearly a century after the Wall Street crash of 1929, one chilling truth remains. The forces that caused the Great Depression never truly disappeared. They've evolved, adapted, and taken on new forms, but at their core, they are the same dangerous mix of greed, easy credit, asset bubbles, and fragile confidence. History didn't stop with 1929. Instead, it started to rhyme, again and again. Take the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s. Just like the Roaring Twenties, investors poured money into technology companies that had no profits, only dreams. Stocks soared on hype and fear of missing out, FOMO. The belief that the internet will change everything inflated prices far beyond reality. When the bubble burst in 2000, trillions in market value vanished. Millions of investors lost savings, and once celebrated tech firms collapsed overnight. Less than a decade later came the global financial crisis of 2008. This time, the mania was real estate. Americans bought homes far beyond their means, fueled by cheap mortgages and Wall Street's invention of complex mortgage-backed securities. Banks sliced and repackaged risky loans, selling them worldwide as if they were safe. When housing prices reversed, the whole system imploded. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, and some of the world's biggest banks stood on the brink of failure, a modern echo of the panic of 1929. The pattern is so predictable that the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has a term for it: Studies show more than 80% of global financial crises follow the same script: easy money, inflated asset bubbles, and the belief that this time is different. Yet every cycle, people convince themselves they've outsmarted the past. Another recurring danger: short-term debt and dependence on foreign capital. The United States in 1929 relied heavily on cheap margin loans. Russia in 1998 relied on short-term bonds, GKOs. Today, many emerging economies are walking the same dangerous path. Argentina and Turkey have borrowed foreign currency to fuel growth. Sri Lanka and Pakistan depend on external funding despite thin foreign reserves. One global shock, like the Federal Reserve raising interest rates or a sudden oil price drop, can cause investors to flee, currencies to crash, and entire economies to unravel. The script hasn't changed. The World Bank warns that 60% of low-income countries are now at high risk of debt distress or already in partial default. It's a sobering reminder that the debt bomb is quietly ticking once again. And perhaps the most important lesson of all: confidence remains the invisible currency that drives everything. In 1929, once faith in the market cracked, no bailout could stop the panic. In 2008, rumors about Lehman Brothers triggered a global meltdown. Today, with instant news and social media, confidence can evaporate in hours instead of days. The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, in 2023 proved how fast fear can move. Customers pulled more than $40 billion in deposits in just 48 hours, toppling the bank before regulators could even respond. In the digital age, panic spreads faster and hits harder than ever before. Globalization makes this even more dangerous. In 1929, America's crash spread overseas through trade and gold flows. Now financial markets are hyper-connected. A shock in one major economy can erase trillions in global market value overnight. The 2008 housing crash started in the U.S., but quickly dragged down Iceland, Greece, Spain, and much of Europe, proving how instantly financial contagion can sweep the planet. And yet, despite decades of painful lessons, human nature hasn't changed. Governments still reach for quick fixes, printing money, running up debt, or keeping rates too low to spur short-term growth. Investors still whisper the most dangerous phrase in finance: "This time is different." But history is clear. It's never truly different. The cycle of greed, boom, bust continues, each time with new technology, new products, and new promises. The Great Depression is not just a chapter in an old economics textbook. It's a mirror reflecting the risks building in today's global system, risks we ignore at our own peril. The Great Depression of 1929 to 1933 is more than just a dark chapter in economic history. It's a massive mirror reflecting the unchanging laws of global finance, laws we keep forgetting whenever prosperity blinds us. Nearly a century later, the lessons from Wall Street's collapse are still urgent and frighteningly relevant. The first lesson: never build prosperity on short-term debt and inflated bubbles. America in the 1920s turned the stock market into a giant speculative machine fueled by cheap credit and margin loans. Russia in 1998 made the same mistake with short-term government bonds. Today, many emerging economies are once again borrowing heavily to cover deficits or chase fast growth, ignoring the foundation beneath. Easy credit creates the illusion of wealth. But when the financial tide shifts, when interest rates rise or foreign capital flees, the whole system can implode in months. There's no quick fix to replace fiscal discipline, structural reform, and strong reserves built to weather storms. The second lesson: confidence is the most valuable currency. Money, stocks, bonds, even gold mean nothing if people lose faith in the system behind them. In 1929, confidence evaporated in days, and no rescue arrived in time. In 2008, just one headline about Lehman Brothers triggered global panic. In 2023, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed in 48 hours as fear spread online and billions vanished with a click. Confidence can't be bought with last-minute bailouts. It's built slowly through transparency, sound risk management, and long-term policy stability. Once it breaks, no amount of cash can stop the flood. The third lesson, "This time is different," is the most dangerous phrase in finance. Every generation convinces itself it's smarter, better equipped, and safer than the last. But history proves otherwise. Before 1929, it was industrial stocks and margin loans. In 2008, it was real estate and exotic derivatives. Today, it's tech, cryptocurrency, and massive government debt. The forms change, the human psychology doesn't. When greed outruns caution and policy grows complacent, bubbles always burst. These aren't just warnings for policymakers, they're lessons for everyone living in today's interconnected world. Governments still lean on short-term fixes, printing money, keeping interest rates low, or loosening credit to juice growth. Many countries are over-leveraged, sitting on thin reserves while foreign debt piles up. Asset bubbles, from housing to tech, keep inflating under the assumption that tomorrow will be safe. But in a hyper-connected global economy, a crisis in one major hub can trigger a worldwide domino effect in days. The next Black Tuesday could move faster, spread wider, and hit harder than anything in 1929, because panic now travels at the speed of a tweet. So what can we do? For policymakers, stop leaning on quick adrenaline shots and build sustainable, disciplined economies, strengthen oversight of the financial system, and protect market trust with transparency and credibility. For investors, resist easy profits, diversify, manage leverage carefully, and remember that high returns always carry high risk. For ordinary people, learn personal finance, don't hand blind trust to banks or speculative manias, and understand that history repeats, often when we're least expecting it. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes. The Great Depression is not a distant tale to dust off in textbooks. It's a living warning of how entire systems can crumble when we forget the fundamentals. Remembering these lessons isn't just about avoiding loss. It's about building a financial world strong enough to survive the storms ahead.